Hi, I'm Jen. Welcome to Fate 40 and Beyond, a podcast for women in midlife who feel like they're behind, like no one else quite understands what they're going through, maybe navigating some tough moments in life, or maybe just need a place to talk about real life. All the stuff that we don't get to talk about to other people. Each episode starts with a tarot card reading when I have a guest, and from there, the conversation unfolds into whatever truth the cards bring. Today is a mini episode, and it's slightly different. It's just me. We talk about midlife growth, intuition, emotional honesty, and what it looks like to build a life that actually feels right. Outside of the podcast, I'm the owner of Soulful Existence, where I work with clients around the world through tarot readings, mediumship, and past life regression. I offer one-on-one sessions for that, and you can find the information in the show notes. Today, I figured I'd take it back to the basics. We're talking about tarot, what it actually does and what it is not. Let's get started. Tarot is one of those things that almost everyone has heard of, but very few people actually understand. Most people's mental image of tarot comes from movies or television. You see a mysterious fortune teller sitting at a table with candles everywhere, and they're flipping over cards only to announce someone's destiny like it's already been decided. It's dramatic, it's mysterious, and sometimes even a little scary, depending on how it's portrayed. But the real story of tarot is actually a lot more interesting than the movie version. Historically speaking, tarot didn't start out as a mystical system at all. The earliest tarot cards that historians have found date back to northern Italy in the 1400s. Wealthy families commissioned beautifully painted decks that were used to play a card game called tarot-chi, which I'm sure I butchered, but these decks were often hand-painted and extremely detailed, which meant that they were expensive and mostly owned by people in noble families. In other words, tarot began as entertainment. It was simply a type of card game that people played socially, not a tool for fortune-telling. It wasn't until centuries later that people started looking at the imagery on the cards and connecting it to deeper symbolic meaning. Around the late 1700s in France, writers and occult thinkers began suggesting that the images in tarot reflected patterns of human life and spiritual development. From there, tarot slowly evolved into something new. People began experimenting with ways to interpret the cards and use them as tools for reflection and guidance. So when we talk about tarot today, we're really talking about a system that has grown and changed over several hundred years. It started as a game, but the images themselves turned out to be powerful symbols. Over time, those symbols became a language that people use to talk about human experiences. A traditional tarot deck contains 78 cards. Those cards are divided into two main groups, the major arcana and the minor arcana. The major arcana contains 22 cards that represent larger life themes and turning points. Cards like the Fool, the Magician, the Lovers, the Tower, Death card, and the Star are all part of this group. If you've ever seen tarot imagery before, chances are you've probably seen some of these cards. They tend to represent major transitions or moments of realization that shape a person's life in significant ways. The remaining 56 cards make up the minor arcana, which are divided into 4 suits: cups, swords, wands, and pentacles. These suits deal with more everyday experiences. Cups tend to relate to emotions and relationships. Swords often deal with mental thoughts, communication, or conflict. Wands represent our energy, creativity, and action. And pentacles are often connected to practical matters like work, money, and stability. What's interesting is that these suits are closely related to playing cards that most of us grew up with. Hearts, spades, clubs, and diamonds all developed from earlier suit systems that looked very similar to tarot suits. So the tarot deck itself is essentially a symbolic map of human experience. It contains cards about beginnings, endings, decisions, conflicts, healing, growth, and transformation. These are experiences that everyone goes through at some point in their life. One of the reasons tarot resonates with people is because the cards operate through something called archetypes. Archetypes are universal patterns that show up across cultures and throughout history. The idea of the hero's journey, the experience of loss followed by transformation, the moment when someone takes a leap into the unknown, these are all themes that appear in myths, stories, and religions around the world. Psychologist Carl Jung wrote about archetypes as patterns that exist in what he called the collective unconscious. According to Jung, humans share certain symbolic patterns that appear repeatedly in dreams, art, and storytelling. Tarot imagery taps into those same kinds of patterns. So when someone looks at a tarot card, they're not just looking at a random picture. They're looking at a symbol that represents a type of human experience. And often, those symbols trigger recognition. Something about the image resonates with what the person is currently going through. When someone comes to a tarot card reading, they usually arrive with a question or situation that they're trying to understand. Sometimes the question is very specific. Someone might ask about a relationship, a job change, or a major life decision that they're considering. Other times, the question is much more open. People often say things like, I feel stuck. I can't figure out why. Or, something in my life feels like it's shifting, but I don't know what direction it's going. During the reading, the cards are shuffled and laid out in a pattern called a spread. Each position in that spread represents a different aspect of the situation. Some positions may represent the past influences that led to the current moment. Others might represent the person's current mindset, external influences around them, or possible directions things could move if the current energy continues. As the cards are laid down or turned over, the images and symbolism become part of the conversation. The reader interprets the cards based on their traditional meanings, the position in the spread, and the context of the person's question. There are also people who, like myself, tend to read more intuitively, and the images themselves could mean something totally different for each individual client. But here's the most important thing to understand about tarot. The cards don't control anything. They simply reflect back to us the energy that we're already experiencing. Tarot is often misunderstood as something that dictates a future. That's not really how it works. A better way to think about tarot is as a mirror. The cards reflect patterns that are already present in someone's life. Sometimes they highlight emotional dynamics that the person has already been feeling, but hasn't fully acknowledged yet. Other times they reveal patterns that are repeating in relationships or decisions. One comparison I often use is the idea of a weather forecast. If a meteorologist says that a storm is coming tomorrow, that forecast didn't create the storm. The forecast is simply reading the conditions that already exist in the atmosphere. The clouds, the pressure systems, and the movement of the air, all of these elements are already in motion. Tarot works in a similar way. The cards reflect the emotional and situational patterns surrounding someone in the present moment. They can show where things may be headed if nothing changes, but they don't remove a person's ability to make a different choice. And that brings us to something that is really important to talk about. Tarot does not remove free will. Your life is not controlled by a deck of cards. Tarot can offer insight and perspective, but the decision always belongs to the person living their life. Sometimes people come into a reading hoping the cards will tell them exactly what to do. They might ask questions like, should I leave this relationship? Or should I quit my job? Or is this person the one? Tarot doesn't function like a command system where the cards issue instructions. Instead, the cards show dynamics. They reveal emotional patterns, motivations, potential outcomes, and sometimes blind spots that the person might not have noticed yet. What someone does with that information is always their choice. Another important thing to understand is that tarot doesn't predict every detail of the future. Life is far too complex for that. There are too many moving pieces. Other people's decisions affect our lives too. Timing changes things. New opportunities appear. Unexpected events shift in our direction. Tarot can show trends or possibilities, but the future itself is always fluid. For many people, the real value of tarot is the moment of reflection it creates. Life moves quickly. Most of us spend our days reacting to responsibilities, solving problems, and managing everything that needs our attention. There isn't always space to step back and look at the bigger picture of our lives. A tarot reading creates that pause. It creates a moment where someone can sit down, take a breath, and examine what's actually happening in their life from a different angle. And something interesting happens in that space. Often people already know the answer to the question they're asking, they just haven't been able to see it clearly yet. One of the most common things people say at the end of a reading is something that always makes me smile. They'll say, "I already knew that." And that's actually the point. Tarot didn't create the answer. It helped bring the answer to the surface. This is also one reason tarot resonates strongly with people in midlife. Midlife tends to be a period where people start to question things they accepted earlier in life. The roles they've played, the expectations they've carried, the paths they've followed because they thought they were supposed to. Sometimes people reach this stage in life and realize they've been living according to a script that doesn't quite fit anymore. I have found that tarot becomes one tool that people will use to explore those questions, not because the cards have authority over their lives, but because the symbolism encourages deeper reflection. And reflection is something we don't give ourselves permission to do too often. Tarot has lasted for hundreds of years, not because it predicts the future with perfect accuracy, but because it provides a structure for thinking about life. It invites people to slow down, consider their patterns, and examine the direction they're moving in. For some people, tarot becomes a spiritual practice. For others, it functions more like a psychological tool. Some people use tarot as a journaling prompt or a meditation aid. Others simply appreciate the art and symbolism. There isn't one single way to relate to tarot. What matters most is the conversation it creates. And at the end of the day, that's really what tarot readings are about. They're conversations about life, choices, emotions, and the patterns we move through as human beings. The cards are simply one way of starting that conversation. So if you've ever been curious about tarot but weren't sure what it actually does, hopefully this episode gave you a clearer picture. Tarot is not theatrical fortune-telling. It isn't a script for your life. It's a symbolic system that has evolved over centuries. And for many people, it becomes a tool for reflection and insight. Some people connect with it deeply. Some people don't connect with it at all. And both perspectives are completely valid. If you enjoy conversations about intuition, growth, and learning how to build a life that feels honest in midlife, you're in the right place. Thanks for spending some time with me today, and I'll see you next time.